For years, we had this idea that fashion consists of women's runways, editorials, collections, a lot of fashion, a lot of extravaganza. And on the other hand, we had menswear, which was mainly men sitting in different scenarios in the same looks over and over again for some centuries. Men's runways have actually been super explorative in the last 2 decades, especially in terms of high fashion. We had revolutionary menswear designers like Hedi Slimane, Raf Simons, Helmut Lang, Jun Takahashi, Rick Owens, and so many more that completely changed the classical idea of menswear that we used to have. But it seems like in the last years, especially towards the end of the 2010s, men's fashion has turned back to factory mode. We're speaking a good jeans, a t-shirt, a good jacket, no fancy, and that's about it. And as much as we saw during the last decades so much extravagant menswear also on the runways, we didn't see so many people impacted by it, and I don't want to refer to the skinny jeans because I'm aware of its influence by Hedi Slimane. But other than that, we didn't see extreme changes in menswear, and there are different reasons for that. Because as much as runways showed how much different possibilities men's have nowadays and how extreme they can go and how they can reflect their personalities in the best ways possible and in what kind of different ways, we kind of still saw the same people on the streets going to their local supermarket, buying the locally sourced strawberries and fresh bread every day. It used to be kind of, and it's kind of still is, the same look every day. And we're going to talk about why. In the 2000s and 2010s, you could technically choose between looking like a dark Prince, Hedi Slimane fanatic in skinny jeans, always suited up no matter what. You were wearing a tie and slender, long, pointy shoes. Or you were on the other side of the hemisphere, which was more like hoodie-oriented, babe kind of clothes, whose religion it is to always have a white hoodie with a print on it. Both of these aesthetics have kind of lost their appeal in the last, I would say probably almost 10 years. It's been a while I've seen somebody, probably it's coming back again because it's 10 years trend cycle time again. But other than that, I think this streetwear and casual tailoring is dead. Because one thing for sure, once we all go back to factory mode and we need to learn how to create fire again and how to build houses again, there will still be one man remaining, and it is that one with a chino look. He will still be there with his tucked in shirt and his slightly cropped, very light beige chinos with beautiful showcasing of the ankle, probably paired with a beautiful pair of suede loafers. They're still remaining, and this will always stay like this. We do not have to fight this. Like, the chino aesthetic will always remain. It's a fight we cannot win. I don't want to judge certain aesthetics here so everybody is accepted on this channel, but I think we just need to be aware that if fashion and all these aesthetics are a different pool of variables, the conservative Ralph Lauren look is probably a constant that will always remain, and I feel like it's stronger than ever before, dressing very conservatively and pretending to be casual, but actually being very conservative. But looking at men's fashion throughout the last few years, I would say, and even on the streets, we see that something infected menswear on the runways and in real life, which is, I think, amazing because we're over runways that don't work on the streets. Like, it's beautiful, but if I want to see art, I go into a museum. I'm very sorry, but fashion serves a function. I mean, I'm absolutely able to see the beauty of abstract fashion that is technically unwearable, but at the end of the day, I'm just a human being and I want to dress well and I want it to be possible. And the same goes for menswear. So I'm very happy to see trends or shifts in fashion, let's better say, happen on the runway and on the streets simultaneously. So we see it has an impact and it's actually a real aesthetic shift. And never have more life-ensuring necessities of these sports been more popular in the world of men's fashion. I just want to quickly remind you of the carabiner that is probably never being used in its main purpose, which is the only idea of survival, but instead it is hanging on demi-washed fake salvaged jeans constantly. And it's a beautiful accessory and it's nice. So it's actually pretty cool that we have a different source of inspiration for men's fashion right now. So to round this whole thing up, I'm introducing you today to a lot of brands, to a lot of runways, to a lot of fashion that you're probably aware of if you know this channel, but maybe you also don't know it. So this is a great video to introduce you a bit to the runways. And it's not going to be about tam-tam and extreme extravaganza stuff. It will be a lot of wearable things that you can implement into your wardrobe, that you can build up with your personal style. So today it's really about building up your personal style by getting inspired by the runways. Because I've been pretty smart in the last seasons and I want to push this here as an educational video and a video that can improve your lifestyle. What else? What else? And since you want to get smarter concerning fashion content, because this is just what you were thinking right now, you actually wanted to leave a comment and tell me like, oh my God, Tuba, it's amazing that you're sharing so much educational content about menswear. Finally, you've been neglecting this topic. I really, really appreciate this. You will probably also want to join my Patreon, where I share another weekly video talking to designers, interviewing them, talking about my personal style development as well, and ideas that I would like to share with you. All these kind of things, sometimes also mental breakdowns that you might enjoy seeing me in. So you can join the Patreon there. And another benefit that you have from being a subscriber is finding people that are finally like you, that you cannot maybe always find around your cute little hometown, which is pretty, but yeah, you miss out on people that are actually interested in fashion or want to find their personal style as well. So you have access to the Discord community, which is very precious and therefore exclusive. So if you join the Patreon, which you passionately want to do right now, you can do that. The link is in my box. And you have access to the Discord with beautiful people, probably the most beautiful and fashionable and talented people I've seen so far. And this is not an exaggeration, it's the plain truth. So back to fashion, and especially men's fall 2025 runway fashion. You might say, hey Tuba, the men's show was shown end of January. Where have you been? It's still mid-April. I'm gonna ask you, what have you been doing? What have you been doing since end of January, Mr. and Mrs.? Huh? Nothing? Okay. Yes, I'm a bit late, but better late than never. You will probably realize that there's not a huge shift that suddenly happened, but there's still something that is like slightly being woven in throughout a lot of brands I would say. And we have 4 major streams that are incoming with the new menswear shows. And that's the idea of utility, workwear, gender fluidity, and layering, which sounds very simple, but we will get into that. So we're gonna start with the shows that I was lucky enough to attend during this season, and also the ones where I think that we can learn from the most. And these will also be the ones you will love the most, right? You will love all of these brands I'm mentioning. No, but I think these are all brands that you really can take something away from, even if it's not 100% your aesthetic. There is something we can learn from, and that's the beauty of fashion. So one show that is probably one of my favorites during Men's Fashion Week is SACAI. Probably the best energy in the room that you can see during Fashion Week. I don't know if it's Shidoso Abe's superpower of creating a good energy in a not so small venue. Usually SACAI shows are pretty big, but also a beautiful venue, a lot of effort, a lot of like installations also in there. It's just an amazing show every time. And I think it's just her energy and also the way she sees fashion as something purposeful and meaningful and not so abstract, but still very artistic in some other way. Anyway, the things that were most striking to me is, of course, the first thing you might think of when you think of SACAI is the implementation of nylon and plissé and the combination of nylon with different fabrics. But there are also other features, like the usage of cargo pants, multiple pockets. We saw 4 layers layered over on top of each other on the arms. We have classical knitwear with added hoodie pockets, which I found pretty interesting. And later we saw the similar ones also on short-sleeved shirts. We saw experimentations with denim. We saw denim jackets that look like workwear jackets also. We had a lot of colorful fringes, wallets on a chain, and nylon wallets on elastic bands. We had trinkets that were super cute. We had a lot of shearling, tweeds for the women's, but it was the men's show. We had triple layered collars in different colors that looked like they were unstitched and restitched again. So, because one thing that Shidoso Abe is amazing in, and I think since the very first day that she started this brand, is the idea of dismantling stuff and reimagining stuff. And usually a lot of classical items that we used to see, like classical knitwear. I mean, it's like a classical Norwegian sweater that you used to see during popping out in the stores in September until February, I don't know. But she takes this piece, is ripping it apart and putting like modern fabrics like nylon or different ones. Sometimes it's a silk plissé, sometimes it's a viscose, completely different things, attaches them onto each other and turns it into a very modern piece, and also changes the silhouette by doing so. And usually it is something you only realize when you really see the pieces in real life movement, because sometimes it looks from the front and when the arms are just next to each other like a normal knitwear piece, but then the model moves and you see that actually underneath the arms it's a plissé, and this very sturdy, stiff item suddenly turns into something that has a lot of movement and appeal. And I think that's something that's extremely unique about SACAI. She also used crop duffel coats this time, so that I think were very interesting. And probably one of my favorite patterns patterns ever, and especially at the SACAI show, were the paisley like green flower prints and wools and mohair, and then cottons mixed in between. And the knit part is integrated in the utility jacket, which just looks so beautiful because you really see how they emerge into each other. My personal favorite version was the women's version of that integration, and I think it's so beautiful to take this very classical and maybe very feminine pattern as well and turn it into this utilitarian piece that has a lot of purposes, but meanwhile just looks very pretty, and sometimes you cannot even guess where the fabrics are changing. So it is very understated when it comes to SACAI when you want to see the brilliance that is actually behind it. But if you look very close up, that's where you see it, and that's why I always say it's in the details. Whatever fashion it is, whatever aesthetic it is, the beauty always lies in the details. So one thing that Chito Abe probably teach the whole fashion world ever, and us as personas as well, is the introduction of complex technical layering. And she's not the only one doing that on the runways. This is also something we see, for example, at KIKO KOSTADINOV evolving more and more, which is very interesting. But if you do want to integrate a bit more the idea of utility and functionality into your wardrobe, but you don't want to look like it is very classical sportswear because you do like your sports gear when you go for running and all these things. I know that they look very stylish, and there are a lot of brands that do very appealing sportswear. You can also go for that, by the way, if you want to. But if you do want it to have a bit more of a personal approach, brands like SACAI are perfect to bring in this complex idea into it while looking a bit more simple, while looking utilitarian, while looking like they're bringing also functionality to the game so you can stay comfortable. And one thing I personally love the most about SACAI is that it's so comfortable. It's always about comfort, and I think being comfortable and yourself is a form of luxury, and nothing looks less sophisticated, nothing looks less elegant. I mean, even if you do not want to be described with these two words, it's still something you want to. No, you don't need to want to be sophisticated. But what I mean really is, once you decide to wear, for example, these triplet layers, maybe like a long sleeve and a button down and another sweater on top of it, and show these 3 layers, it might sound ridiculous to you, but it also brings a form of functionality when you just want to unlayer something also, and suddenly can be warmer as well. You have different styling possibilities with these stuff. You can take your shirt and put it around your waist. And SACAI also provides kind of this appeal if you are still into tailoring sort of, but not into the business casual kind, and you do not want it to look like you're a corporate person, even though we love everybody no matter where you work or whatever it is. But I think business casual is probably one of the most hated words in the world. Like, nobody wants to look business casual. It's usually something that your boss asks you to look like, and that's another reason why you just don't like it. But you can like suits, and I think suits are something beautiful, and you usually bring out your best sides in it because you can emphasize whatever you want, even if it's your shoulders or your waist or whatever part it is. So I think tailoring has gotten this very bad reputation because on the one side, we saw it suddenly popping up everywhere as like very casual suits that very oftentimes also were produced in low quality, and we didn't want to be associated with that. And on the other hand, there were these cropped chino-like pants and very tight-fitting blazers that you equally don't like. So I think it's cool that brands like SACAI bring in this idea of functionality in these sports that I was speaking about, because it is the casualness that we like. It is not casual in poor quality, it is not casually in poor fit, but it is bringing this modern idea of we need multiple approaches for a blazer. So I think one thing that SACAI is the best for is outerwear. And even if you don't get the SACAI piece, I think it's amazing to get inspired by if you want to try layering. So if you're fed up kind of with wearing the same jeans and the same shirt over and over again and the zip because it looks kind of fine, but it's not really what you want, I think hybrid fashion of Chitose is just bringing in this new idea of functionality with aesthetically pleasing elements that can bring you out of your comfort zone without getting uncomfortable. And that's rare, I think. Coming to another brand that has kind of the same, not core principles, I would say, but definitely when it comes to utilitarian fashion and functionality and also the idea of layering, I think there are some connection points and you will find it very appealing, and maybe you know the brand already I'm talking about. KIKO KOSTADINOV. If you're not a fashion person and if you're watching this video as an outsider, let's say, because you're a normal human being with actual hobbies and normal friends, you know KIKO KOSTADINOV probably from the Essex collaboration that are also pretty cool. And we're going to talk about these Essex collaborations in about this show as well, because there was another one and I think it's very striking, and I would really like to know what you think about them, because I think it's shifting slightly. But speaking about KIKO KOSTADINOV, what I love about this brand is that it kind of started also as the underdog of fashion, because he definitely always had a very distinct vision when it comes to menswear. I think KIKO is really one of the initiators here, and there are several reasons for this. And one thing that we have on the KIKO KOSTADINOV runway that is still very rare in my opinion on runways, because you really need to have an eye to see these things, is the details, because he has so many details that you can really reuse yourself to try your new personal aesthetics that you want to build on, to build a new personal style, because that's what this is about. So look clearly into the KIKO KOSTADINOV images. You can find them on Vogue Runway and everywhere on the internet if you type into Google KIKO KOSTADINOV Fall 2025. I think it's one of the most interesting shows for menswear if you want to develop your personal style and don't really know into which direction to go, where you have such a spiced up pot of different details that you can implement and make your own. And we're going to get into it. I'm speaking about the multiple lapels with multiple zips and buttons for different closure techniques, for example. Again, utility, functionality. We were speaking about this. He had tabby Essex boots that I find personally amazing. I think it's very interesting, and I would like to know what you think about these Essex. He has long gloves, which is clearly inspired also from the women's runways. Very interesting to use also women's details. He has Polar Tech fleece jackets. He has knit boleros that we also very rarely see on the men's runways. He has oversized belts that are kind of turned onto the side, pretty big with a buckle-like thing that they have. And KOSTADINOV's work often kind of involves this complex cultural and historical reference that he deliberately recontextualizes, I feel. In his previous collections, he referenced very often the 70s Eastern European sportswear to Bulgarian folklore. And the Fall 2025 collection kind of appears to continue that practice of creating like very richly referential designs that challenge the conventional menswear codes with very unexpected constructions and techniques. So the four major points of inspiration that always evoke with every KIKO KOSTADINOV show, and in my opinion, they always are getting more intense in details and more interesting, is his constructivist and utilitarian approach. It's the technical wear that he has. It's his Japanese avant-garde that he has, also combined with some folklore heritage that he uses every now and then. A lot of sportswear and workwear inspiration as well. This sounds like a lot of different looking aesthetics, but if you look at the collections themselves, you see that they're not so far away from each other, and then it's always tiny hints where you can really figure out that this is actually the sum of all of these different inspirations. So KIKO KOSTADINOV is, for example, an amazing brand, and there are not many that are great in that. I think there are a lot of brands that are great in outerwear, and that's the reason why my closet is full of outerwear, but I really struggle with finding good shirts and good pants. And I think KIKO is really, really great in creating like unusual looking pants while keeping them very functional and kind of interesting. Like there's always a button, a closure, something functional that you can reuse. The fabrics are very, not as heavy. Usually KIKO KOSTADINOV has, I mean, they're also like very this functional utility approach fabrics that he has, sometimes that are definitely of thicker fabric, but he has a lot of pants and shirts that are like multi-purpose. I really, really loved also the jackets he had this season with the multiple closing techniques, because it made it look a bit more chic. And I'm very sorry for using this word because I know it's kind of forbidden in the world of fashion. Everybody hates it now in 2025, but I think chic stands for something else in 2025 than what it used to in 1980 when, I don't know, Carl was doing Chanel. But what I mean when I say chic, for me, chicness is also smartness, but also an elevated form of that. And if you manage to bring something utility inspired and create something that is beautiful, I think that's what works. So if you are into this utilitarian looks, I think SACAI and KIKO KOSTADINOV will be your go-to brands to get inspired by. Another brand that is equally relevant but aesthetically pretty far away from the ones we've talked about before, like SACAI and KIKO KOSTADINOV, is the Japanese brand AURALEE. AURALEE for me is the brand of fabric innovation and the new idea of luxury as it's supposed to be. Among fashion enthusiasts and attendees, it's also being considered the brand with the highest value for personal style development because of its styling. If there's one thing I heard during the show the most, it was just like the word styling, how to style that. It's so easy because the pieces in classical manner are very basic. AURALEE is the brand that creates beautiful basics, but not the basics that you see all over the place. Everybody that thinks they can create the perfect white t-shirt right now that we need, but that is probably even cropped. a crop white t-shirt where they're like, we are revolutionizing the men's t-shirt world. No, AURALEE is the one that you should actually aim for. It was very sad because it was not really accessible for a while because it's a Japanese brand and they were not stocked in so many places. But now they're everywhere and that's kind of cool. That's really, really great. And the show was beautiful. It was beautiful. Again, look at the runway in detail. We saw, for example, tiny men's cardigans. We saw zippers under the dresses and it was like a tank over it. It looked amazing. We had zippers over formal wear. We had belt over sweaters. We had tiny belts. We had multiple outerwear layering. A lot of jackets that looked like it's probably some technical wear or something were suddenly silk. There was a lot of shearling that probably just looked like wool or something. Like, AURALEE is that brand you see on the runway, you admire it for the styling, and I really, it's one of the very few brands, I have to say, where I personally get inspired by and where I'm really like, okay, I should absolutely wear my neck zips under my dress and not on top of that. That's on the one side. And on the other side is once you touch the garments, and yes, there are shows where you see that on the runway as well, but I think this understated luxury, and that's why I said I think AURALEE is the brand really for the understated luxurious person. If you do care a lot about the quality and the garments, it is such a mind shift. And I haven't seen a brand that is competitive right now when it comes to the aesthetic and quality positioning of AURALEE. It's just plain beautiful. And when you need to break down AURALEE to keep it in your head sometime when you want to think about it again, I think the main values of the brand are definitely the material excellence, then the workwear inspiration that you see also throughout the collections, the 90s minimalism that you see throughout the collections, and this hybrid functionalization, I would call it. I think it's not the same kind of functionality or utility that we've been speaking about before at like SACAI and KIKO. But when it comes to AURALEE, it's very understated, it's very minimal, but it's still, even the styling itself serves a certain idea of utility. And that's probably the quiet part about it. And it just, AURALEE for me is always this brand that is a bit like a canvas and you can really pick out whatever you want. And the brand is also very distinct, but not as distinct in their core patterns or features like the brands we talked before, but it really gives you the chance to like completely build your personal style on that. And that's why I think AURALEE is just like the perfect startup brand. And I don't want to call it startup brand because it does absolutely no justice to AURALEE because it is a high peak professional brand, but it might be just easier for you to not step out too far out of your comfort zone when you want to get to know new pieces. And from AURALEE, I can just recommend all the pieces, but I do love the tops, the knitwear pieces, and the jackets a lot. All these brands we talked about until now are kind of going into the classical approach of menswear, I would say, but are of course still very disruptive. But there are also brands that are working a bit harder against it. And I actually asked you on Instagram about your opinion, what you think is menswear relevant right now and what you're happy about that is changing. And I know a lot of people also struggle with that, but gender fluidity was mentioned very often and I was honestly very happy to see that. I think we saw that in tiny features like, for example, the bolero at KIKO KOSTADINOV, or like just the way some things are like the closure is working on these things, but you see these very feminine attributes that we were not seeing so often in menswear yet. And there are some brands that are always challenging the classical menswear. And one brand that is doing it, especially with the change to a new creative director, which is Julian Klausner. I'm speaking about Dries van Noten. So if you talk about Dries van Noten, you usually talk about beautiful fabrics, silks, organzas, a lot of embroideries, florals, patterns, prints, all these kind of things. Beautiful women's wear, very ethereal, very fluid, very lightweight. I mean, he loves to have some transparency throughout his collections, but also heavy wools and break all these things. But it definitely has also a very feminine approach. And you could see a lot of these aspects also throughout the menswear collections. But with the change to Julian Klausner, the thing we saw in the fall collection for menswear was actually still with support of the creative studio. So it wasn't the fully first ever Julian Klausner show. The first ever only creative director Julian Klausner show was for fall 2025 women's wear. I had the chance to look at these pieces from close up and I have to say it was insane. And it was also insane that this was finally menswear. I was so happy to see that because it's bringing in a new idea of romance. And again, it didn't suddenly turn into a very feminine menswear collection. That's not the point at all. It is just that the very rich features that women's wear is usually benefiting of, which is these sparkles and stones and embroideries, where you usually just see like the basic version of that for menswear where there's nothing going on because either nobody wants to pay for it because it's too expensive to produce, or I don't know, they think men don't like it. But I do think that men just enjoy pretty things as well. And that's Dries Van Noten. There were a lot of dark romantic features throughout this collection. We had this fisherman style, a bit like the Sikh Victorian style that we see referenced sometimes. There were tied belts over fur coats. We saw very wide necklines that are new and fresh. We saw puffy arms. We saw beautiful raglan sleeves that looked very couture inspired. We had a lot of pussy bows. We had a lining that was as striking in the inside as the outside, maybe even more striking in the inside. Feathers and shirling, and all of the shoot, for example, was shot by Willy van der Peer, who is famous for this kind of aesthetic. And this whole collection was partially inspired by William Burroughs' book, The Wild Boys. The book is about a futuristic underground movement that appears to have been time machined to Antwerp in the early 19th century. It's about a homosexual youth movement whose objective it is to overthrow the existing order. And it's set in an apocalyptic near future and follows a gang of boys who engage in orgies, assassinations, and various forms of violence while fighting against the totalitarian government. And the main topics here are kind of distrust of authority, exploration of human sexuality, drug use, and a fascination for alternative social structures as well. This book has also been influential in countercultural movements and has inspired other artists, including the musician David Bowie, whose song The Wild-Eyed Boy from Free Cloud shares some of that thematic elements with the book. And if you think about the previous collections of Dries Van Noten throughout the years, especially the 2010s, you will see that this is not a completely new idea that is evoking in the house of Dries Van Noten, where these elements were always kind of included. But the moment I saw, for example, the Julian Klausner showroom with the clothes hanging in them, you definitely got the shift that was happening at Dries Van Noten as well. So I think what was very beautiful is here that you can absolutely see the references of Dries, and that's great and that's amazing, and we should definitely keep that. But you also saw that new road that Julian Klausner is heading with, including a bit of that darkness and also the personal approach of questioning yourself or fighting against authority while doing so. It was a bit more rebellious than what we were used to see. And it's not that we have it the first time. There was also the fall 2016 collection, which was also heavily influenced by this psychedelic era and specifically referenced the work of Marianne Faithfull and Anita Pallenberg, which are figures that connected to the same countercultural movements that embraced Burroughs in the 1960s and 70s. That collection, for example, had a lot of similar aesthetics and ideas, and in their proportions, also in the usage of embroideries and velvets. You always had this dark romanticism, but I think with Julian, it's being exposed a bit more and brought a bit more to the edge. For the Spring-Summer 2020 menswear collection, for example, we also saw that Dries explore themes of psychological transformation and rebellion, and he incorporated psychedelic prints and gender-fluid styling as well, which kind of also resonates with Burroughs' explorations of identity and control. Dries Van Noten also collaborated with the artist Wes Wilson, who's known for his psychedelic concert posters from the 1960s counterculture again, and connecting to the same cultural milieu that Burroughs operated within. And what we see now that Dries Van Noten has consistently been referencing books and novelists and music and actors oftentimes, we also see that Dries Van Noten, the brand, is kind of going into this new exploration, especially for menswear, where we have a bit more rebellion that is now bringing the whole brand to the edge. And I think that's very exciting for menswear, especially if you're more interested in slightly more romantic silhouettes, maybe a bit more classic silhouettes. And when I say classic, I don't mean the 1970s or 60s, but there are a lot of references also from the 19th century, a lot of Victorian references right now. Beautiful styling, and again, it looked like couture, the way you saw the things crafted. If you are into embroideries, if you do care about velvets and silks and these very fine garments, Dries Van Noten is the brand for you to go to. The last brand I want to talk about today that I think has a very distinct aesthetic and it's very much differentiating itself from all the other brands, and I think it's interesting also for personal style development because it offers a lot, is Mama Miuccia's brand Prada. And it's been a few seasons that we see Raf Simons co-working with Miuccia in her office. I think it's a very interesting symbiosis that they create. And I know that a lot of people struggle with understanding or maybe just liking it. Sometimes it's not a question of understanding. It's really like, I don't like this. But what I think is a big Miuccia Prada fan, what I have to say about this is that the integration of somebody where like Raf Simons, that has always a very modern approach, and modern approach only, helps the brand Prada, especially for menswear, to bring out a bit this modern approach that Prada menswear was kind of lacking, because it turned into this very uniformal brand in the past. Women's wear was always amazing. I always loved what Miuccia was doing. I think it's just also a bit more interesting now with Raf Simons, because we see that there is like this co-working energy, and you definitely see the different sources of inspiration. And if you have followed the two designers separately throughout their careers, you're definitely well aware where which influences come from. Okay, so if there are no embroideries anymore, we know who's guilty of that. But one thing I have to say that I really enjoy with Raf Simons' design collections is that he always brings in an idea or a feeling of discomfort. There's always something ill-fitting, and I think that's what connects him with Miuccia Prada the very much most, because she was always the queen of bringing in something uncomfortable, something where you were like, okay, that coat needs to leave, or that embroidery is just finally too much, that's a lot of prints. And Raf is doing the same thing, but not with more is more like Prada is doing, for example, but he's doing it in a bit more graphical way, I would say, especially in terms of colors and silhouettes. And one thing that a lot of people mention, and I think it's amazing because it's more and more people, and I think we're all aligned on this, is there is something called the Prada effect. And the Prada effect means that you see the collection and you don't understand it, similar to maybe the avant-garde shows I talked about before. And it takes some time, but it's not because you don't understand it. It's because you don't find it beautiful, even in your very disrupted sense of what beauty is, and not according to very classical, traditional norms. You have really struggled to understand why this exact look is on the runway. And it usually takes me 1 to 2 weeks to see the collection, to understand what is going on, and to really value what I was seeing actually. And yes, every time you understand it way later. I think Prada is the most timeless brand out there in terms of, and I'm not speaking about quiet luxury, in terms of you can take a Prada piece from the last 30 years, take whatever season you want, put it in front of somebody, and that person will think it's from a current season. No brand in the world has this effect. And that's because Miuccia Prada's mind is so wild with connecting all these dots in her head that she creates something that is so complex that you don't immediately understand it. And that's the beauty about it. And that's what I love about it, because she manages to show us something that looks initially ugly to us. And she literally invented the term ugly chic. If we know, like, if you remember, like from the 90s, that's how it evolved. You know, she was not being celebrated by press and editors, and so many high-scaled runway editors nowadays remember how they used to write about Miuccia Prada, not understanding the collections. And she still has the same mechanics of creating collections, which is creating something so minimally disturbing, but disturbing that we don't like it, and it takes time for us to understand it and to see the true beauty behind it. And it's not because the advertising and the campaigns were so amazing that we get sold on it. Everybody's doing advertising and campaigns, but it's so complex that we don't understand it. And this menswear collection was one of those things. So I think if you are into experimenting with not only the classical idea of masculinity, but also having a very artistic approach, you should have a look at Prada. When I saw the Risi the day after the show, I was shocked about what I was seeing, because it didn't look like what I saw on the screen the day before about the Prada show. I didn't understand it again. I was just like, okay, I will need a bit time to understand it fully. It looks like, okay, we have some coats. Why are they not wearing any shirts? Why do we have so many cowboy boots? Okay, it is a Raf Simons show, so of course there are cowboy boots. But why is there so much faux fur? Is it faux fur? What is that exactly? I later also had the chance to look close up in the Paris showroom at all the pieces. And that is something you don't see over the screen. Prada is also a brand where you need to touch the items, where you need to get close to them to understand the subliminal effect that is completely washed out on a screen. When you look at the collection very quickly and you have slightly an idea of Raf Simons, you definitely see that we have these striking Raf Simons colors. He does love a strong color in contrast to like grays and blacks, and we saw a lot of pale blues, tartans, grays, old prints, neons, pajamas, and most of the looks looked like they consisted of pieces you threw on very quickly because you need to go down, because you need to open the door, because you're receiving a UPS package, and that's why you need to run down. It's that look. It's exactly this look. And even though the show felt new, it also had a lot of familiar elements that we had seen already. And Raf Simons said that the collection was inspired by a lot of movies, and the clothes kind of contained a lot of recognizable references like shearling or fuzzy materials that reminded the audience of Vikings, or maybe some cartoon characters from the Flintstones. There were also a lot of Western movie influences with star decorations and special cowboy pockets and boots. And some pieces featured colorful 1960s flower patterns that looked like they came from a fun beach movie. In contrast to this whole collection, it was also very interesting how you entered the runway or the venue. It was, of course, in the Fondazione Prada in Milan, but also you had to pass some sort of plastic curtain. It kind of reminded me a bit of the slime collection that they had that was pretty much insane. But you also were stepping on a very Art Deco inspired carpet, surrounded by something that looked like a huge construction, something that is being built or being removed. I just thought it was a beautiful contrast. Even though it was a huge room, you kind of felt squeezed in, and you had this very old heritage French inspired carpet that was beautifully blue, but then you have all these very raw modern construction metals surrounding you, so it also felt very uncomfortable on the other side. I think it was again like a depiction of the collection as well, where we also saw these very primal human inspired things like faux furs that were actually wools, by the way, and looked impeccable in real life. That kind of builds a contrast to the modern ideas that he showed in form of reinterpretation of the cowboy boots that kind of everybody has at home. So is it maybe a pair that you just slip into when you want to get out really quickly? And when the press talked to Miuccia Prada and Raf Simons later backstage, it was also interesting what they said, because it was also kind of part of what the press notes were. It was kind of a fight against AI, what they tried to create with this collection. She said this is how to, again, go into humanity, passion, and instinct. And she said, describing a naive or spontaneous way of choosing things, which is the spontaneous, I need to quickly go out and just throw things on. And if you really think about it, the first can really be referencing some caveman and our way of dressing and approaching all of these things nowadays. And Raf Simons later said, things can come together even if they seem like they're not supposed to maybe be together. We do not want to limit ourselves. Our aim was to make it feel warm and human and instinctive, but also beautifully domestic in a way. And I think beautifully domestic describes this collection the very best, because it felt so unformal. It felt so normal in some kind of way. It really felt like, I mean, we had looks that looked like somebody just threw over a coat and didn't have time to wear something underneath. We had pajamas, we had a lot of fuzzy things, with a lot of knitwear that was also very beautiful. We had maybe silky satin pants that looked pretty much ill-fitting in that context for the eye, for a very classical vision of beauty. Overall, I want to say that this Prada collection was actually a very precise example of how Prada, and now with Raf Simons, they managed to create a very uncomfortable feeling of beauty that only with time resonates in our minds and makes sense. So that's the beauty of Prada. So if you want to be a bit more disruptive, a bit more eclectic when it comes to the form of styling, also wearing a bit more unusual things, unhinged things, things that look like they're not supposed to be there because it's very ill-fitting, I think Prada is the brand to go. And I think that's probably maybe one of the easiest to create this aesthetic, because you can literally take your normal clothes and your normal looks that you're wearing all the time and then just put something ill-fitting, like a pair of cowboy boots, a coat, something silky, a fabric that is kind of not fitting. It needs to have an idea of ugliness and discomfort to be very Prada. So these were the shows I wanted to talk with you about. I think these were kind of the most distinct ones and interesting ones when you create or you want to develop your personal styles. It's definitely the ones I look at when I want to build up my personal style. It's very important looking at the runways, and I have done several videos speaking about personal style. And I know I mention every time that research, especially looking at the runways and understanding designers, is one of like the pre-works you need to do before understanding what you really want. And I know you don't need to have a very deep interest in fashion, but you need to understand what's out there. You need to know everything before deciding what you are. So what I can just encourage you to do is, of course, watch all these videos on this channel, but also go on Vogue Runway, look at the runways, look what you find slightly appealing. I think all of these brands I mentioned make it possible for you to grab something out of them, to get inspired, to try something new, to bring in some a new form of masculinity, a bit more gender fluidity, some feminine approach as well, some feminine attributes. Because I think one thing that fashion was missing the most, and that's also what a lot of people said when I asked my little questionnaire thing on Instagram, was that it's so boring. It's literally, like I said at the beginning, a shirt and a pant and a workwear jacket, and that's not enough. You deserve more. Menswear definitely deserves more, and I think with brands like DRIES, NOTEN, PRADA, Comme des Garçons, and a lot of a bit more accessible brands as well, but these are the ones we see on the runway, and I would say these are the most artistic ones. I also asked you a bit about the brands that you liked. A lot of you didn't really answer with direct brands, but things you were missing. And I just think it's very interesting. So if you want to, I can also make a video about more accessible contemporary brands that you can actually maybe also purchase if you want to, if you are that. Or you are sewing them because you are a tailor and have talents. Any of those things. So this was my men's fashion fall 2025 sum up. If you do want more fashion content because this is not enough and you are addicted to fashion like other people are to oxygen, subscribe to the Patreon, get Discord access, and be able to communicate with people like me and even way cooler people actually with better style and more of a clue of fashion. We do live talks. We have business professional talks where we invite people that share to us how they got so successful and smart and cute. And we do like calls all the time. So the link is down below. I hope you like this and see you to the women's video.